My name is Clara Hayes. I'm 38 years old, and I'm a senior financial analyst. The moment it all came crashing down wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, suffocating squeeze. It was a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks after my sister, Brenda, had discovered the truth. We were at my parents' house for dinner, a ritual I'd always cherished but now dreaded. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, palpable enough to choke on. My mother, usually so boisterous, picked at her lasagna, her eyes darting between me and Brenda. My father stared at his plate, a familiar pattern when conflict brewed. Then Brenda, her voice tight with a manufactured tremor, finally broke the silence. "Clara," she began, pushing her untouched plate away, "we just want to understand. After everything, all these years, why did you let us suffer?" The words hung in the air, cold and sharp, like shards of ice. I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest, a mixture of disbelief and a deep, aching weariness. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I simply gripped the edge of the dining table, my knuckles white, and met her gaze. My family, the people I had quietly supported and worried about for decades, were now accusing me of cruelty. They had no idea what it had taken for me to build what I had, or the true cost of their casual entitlement. But I knew, and I would make sure they understood, too. The silence stretched, a stage set for a reckoning that was long overdue. To truly understand that moment, you need to go back, far before the $11 million figure became a weapon. My family wasn't wealthy. My father was a carpenter, a good one, but prone to impulsive spending. My mother was a homemaker, fiercely loving but equally prone to worry and enabling. Brenda, 2 years my junior, had always been the free spirit, drifting between jobs, always just a little short on rent or needing help with a car repair. I, on the other hand, was the pragmatic one, the planner. Even as a teenager, while Brenda was dreaming of being a rock star, I was balancing my checkbook and reading investment blogs. I saw money not as a means to an end, but as a foundation, a shield against the endless anxieties I saw my parents grapple with. After college, I landed a job in finance, slowly climbing the corporate ladder. I lived frugally, saved aggressively, and made smart, long-term investments. My family, meanwhile, seemed to exist in a perpetual state of financial precarity. There was always a crisis. Dad needed a new tool, Mom's car broke down, Brenda was facing eviction. I helped where I could, quietly, without fanfare. I paid for my parents' new furnace when theirs died in winter. I covered Brenda's security deposit for her first apartment. I never kept track, never asked for repayment. It was simply family first, a mantra I truly believed in. What I didn't understand yet was that my quiet generosity wasn't seen as support, but as an expectation. My ability to always figure it out for them had slowly eroded their own sense of responsibility. If I had savings, why wouldn't I share? If I had a stable job, why wouldn't I bail them out? The questions were never explicit, but they hung in the air with every casual request for a loan that was never repaid, every sigh about their own struggles while I remained silent about my own growing financial stability. The true turning point came 8 years ago. My great-aunt Beatrice, a sweet, eccentric woman I barely knew, passed away and left me a modest inheritance, $50,000. It wasn't life-changing money for many, but for me, it was a golden opportunity. Instead of using it for a down payment on a house, which my parents immediately suggested, or giving Brenda a leg up, I invested it all in a small, promising tech startup. I did my due diligence, saw the potential, and took a calculated risk. I told no one. My family would have seen it as a windfall to be distributed, not a seed to be nurtured. I wanted to prove to myself that I could build something substantial, quietly, without the added pressure of their expectations. For years, that investment grew, slowly at first, then exponentially. The startup had a wildly successful IPO, and my shares soared. I diversified, reinvested, and consulted with a private wealth manager. I kept my head down, lived my comfortable but not ostentatious life, and continued to offer my quiet support to my family, never letting on the true scale of my personal fortune. I bought my own condo, drove a reliable but not flashy car, and took modest vacations. I was building a future, not hoarding gold. Then came the discovery. Brenda had been complaining for months about the clutter in her apartment, hinting that she needed help organizing her tax documents for a messy freelance year. I offered to help, as I always did. We spent a Saturday afternoon sifting through piles of receipts and statements. I was in her living room, sorting through a box of old mail, when she walked in, holding a single, crisp document. It was a quarterly brokerage statement, accidentally mixed in with her own papers from a time I'd helped her move. It clearly bore my name, my address, and a number that, even 8 years ago, would have been staggering. The total asset value was listed in the high 7 figures. Her eyes, usually so light and carefree, were wide with a mixture of shock and something I couldn't quite place. "Clara," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "what is this? This can't be real." I froze, my heart sinking. I knew this moment would come eventually, but I had hoped it would be on my terms. I tried to explain, to calm her, but the number on the paper had already done its work. The next day, after she'd had time to process, or rather, to share the news with our parents, the calls started. My mother, tearful and confused. My father, gruff and hurt. And Brenda, now armed with indignation, demanding answers. The subsequent 2 weeks were a blur of awkward dinners, strained phone calls, and veiled accusations. My parents couldn't reconcile the image of their financially stable but seemingly ordinary daughter with the reality of her immense wealth. They saw the money, not the years of discipline, the calculated risks, the quiet sacrifices. They saw the furnace I paid for, the car repairs I covered, the small checks I sent, and then they saw the $11 million. The contradiction, in their minds, was stark and unforgivable. They felt betrayed, as if I had deliberately withheld a solution to all their problems. "We thought you were struggling, too, sometimes," my mother had said in one phone call, her voice raw. "You never said anything. We were so worried about you." The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. They were worried about me while I was quietly ensuring they had a roof over their heads and food on their table. My recognition was sharp and painful. They didn't see my wealth as a testament to my hard work, but as a personal slight, a deliberate act of exclusion. They believed I had kept it from them, not for privacy or self-preservation, but out of malice. Leading up to that fateful Tuesday dinner, I had done my preparation. I hadn't consulted a lawyer, this wasn't about legal action, but I had spent hours reviewing my own financial records. Not to justify myself, but to solidify my own narrative. I had documented every instance of financial assistance I'd given my family, every bill I'd paid, every loan I'd quietly forgiven. I didn't plan to throw it in their faces, but I needed to remind myself of the truth. I also spoke to Sarah, a trusted friend and colleague, who listened patiently and reminded me that my money was mine, earned through my own efforts, and I owed no one an explanation for how I chose to manage it. Her words were a balm, reminding me that I wasn't the villain they were trying to paint me as. So, when Brenda finally delivered her loaded question at the dinner table, "Why did you let us suffer?" I was ready. I took a deep breath, the scent of my mother's lasagna suddenly cloying, and looked directly at her. "Brenda," I said, my voice calm, "I never let anyone suffer. My finances are my own. I built that wealth through years of hard work, careful planning, and a significant risk I took with an inheritance from Aunt Beatrice, which I never discussed with anyone. It was my private venture, my personal security." My mother gasped, but I continued, unwavering. "For years, I've quietly helped this family. I paid for Dad's furnace when it broke. I covered your security deposit, Brenda, and helped with countless car repairs. I sent Mom money for groceries when she was short. I did this without asking for repayment, without fanfare, because I loved you and wanted to help. I never asked for anything in return, and I certainly never asked you to sacrifice your own financial well-being for mine." My father finally looked up, his face etched with confusion. "But Clara, $11 million? We've been struggling for so long. We could have used some of that." "You were struggling, Dad," I replied, "because of your own choices. Your spending habits, your refusal to plan for retirement, Brenda's inability to hold down a stable job. Those were your choices, not mine. My money was not a secret fund for your emergencies. It was my future, built diligently, while I continued to support you in ways you now seem to have forgotten or taken for granted. Brenda slammed her hand on the table. So you're saying we deserve to struggle? That we're just lazy and irresponsible? Her voice was shrill, laced with indignation. I'm saying, I countered, looking each of them in the eye, that you are responsible for your own lives. Just as I am responsible for mine. I never asked you to suffer. I simply chose to build my own financial independence without making myself vulnerable to endless demands or resentment. You never asked me how I was doing, financially or otherwise. You just presented your problems and expected a solution. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the clinking of my father's fork against his plate. My mother started to cry softly. Brenda looked furious, her face flushed. They had expected me to crumble, to apologize, to offer a share of my wealth as penance. Instead, I had held my ground, not with anger, but with a quiet, undeniable truth. The immediate aftermath was devastating to our family dynamic. My parents were hurt, feeling exposed and unappreciated. Brenda was outright hostile, convinced I was a cold, selfish person. For weeks, the calls stopped. My mother eventually reached out, but the warmth was gone, replaced by a cautious distance. Brenda refused to speak to me, sending furious texts about how I had changed and how I clearly didn't care about family. I didn't offer them any of the $11 million. I couldn't. Not because I was heartless, but because to do so would validate their entitlement and erase my years of careful planning and quiet sacrifice. It would teach them nothing about responsibility and everything about manipulation. What I did do, however, was change my boundaries. I stopped offering unsolicited financial help. When they asked, I now politely declined or offered advice instead of money. It was a stark shift, and it forced them, slowly, awkwardly, to begin figuring things out for themselves. My relationship with my family became irrevocably altered. It wasn't the warm, close-knit unit I had always envisioned, the one captured in the faded family photo album I used to pore over as a child. That album, filled with smiling faces from simpler times, now felt like a relic from a different life. The smiles in those pictures were genuine, unburdened by the weight of unspoken expectations and millions of dollars. I still had the album, tucked away in a drawer, but I rarely opened it. The family in those pages didn't exist anymore. The one that remained was learning, painfully, that family first didn't mean my money first. It meant taking responsibility, for themselves, for each other, and for the choices they made.